This is something really absorbing Keir Starmer tremendously. He talks about it and thinks about it a great deal. He says it's a huge priority. Is the new Labour government right to say that they will let prisoners out early? We're taking your calls on this, 0207 862 2222. That's the number you need to get in touch. The Ministry of Justice is considering a plan to release offenders after they've served just 40% of their sentence in a bid to tackle overcrowding in prison. Keir Starmer says it's one of the most urgent issues facing his new government, with prison governors warning they'll be full within the next week or so. The new proposal would only apply to non-violent prisoners, but could mean that thousands of prisoners would be released early across all prisons in England and Wales. So, Nicola, is this a good idea?
It might seem like a very bad idea, but this is what Starmer has inherited. In fact, there were rumours within Tory circles that one of the reasons why Sunak could have called the election when he did was because this was inevitable and this was going to happen, and he didn't want it to happen necessarily before the election was called. It's not ideal, no, but is it the lesser of two evils? I personally would rather that violent criminals, murderers, rapists saw jail time and were put away in prison, and that people who have been serving sentences or served the majority of their sentence, or maybe even 40% of it, for
there's a difference. Obviously, we all know this from O-level maths, even if we failed it, like me, that 40% and the majority is not the same thing. 40% is less than half of your sentence.
Yeah, but
I mean, less than half. And you think about the expense, the police, all of the kind of court time and everything that's gone into finding these criminals, putting them through the court process, convicting them, imprisoning them, and now letting them out with just 40% of the sentence.
There's no
what
space.
was the point?
Yeah, but there's no space.
Yeah.
And this is it. A murderer commits murder, and, prison's full.
But, Mike, we all remember, I certainly do, at school, when our schools, state schools, ran out of space, what did they do? They put a porter cabin in the grounds, another porter cabin in the grounds. Some people's entire education took place in these porter cabins in the grounds because the schools were too small. I'm not saying put prisoners in porter cabins, of course I'm not, but surely it must be possible to extend or find or do something to make more provision for prisoners.
That is one of the solutions. Look, of course, you keep rapists and murderers in prison, but you've got to remember, if you're in prison, it's because you're a criminal.
Exactly.
And if you start letting people out of prison at this rate, you will cause a crime wave on the streets. Now, I've got a figure here, right? 9% of criminals are responsible for 58% of all crimes below what's regarded as serious, murder, rape and all that. You'll just release a crime wave onto the streets, honestly. This man, Mr Timpson, who's taking over as prison minister, he's a very good man and he helps rehabilitate prisoners. But all prisoners don't want to be rehabilitated. Some of them go out and they continue their life of crime. Now, you've just touched on a very good point, Vanessa. What can we do about it? I've spoken to people who are experts. They say we can deport more foreign criminals, get tougher, deport more foreign criminals, open up spaces in our prisons, extend current prisons, as you've said. You can build onto prisons, and if we can go and look at former closed-down army camps to try and house migrants who want to come to this country, cannot the same be done for overflowed prisons to provide more spaces for prisoners? And we can introduce things called rapid deployment cells, which, again, is converting secure buildings into temporary accommodation for prisoners.
Because otherwise, Nicola, aren't you saying, there's very little deterrent, there's very little punishment? Part of justice being seen to be done is the idea that being deprived of your freedom really is the ultimate punishment in this country.
Yes.
And if 40% of a sentence is paltry, isn't it?
Yeah, it depends what the sentence was in the first place. I mean, I would argue that the difference between 6 months in prison and 8 months in prison is not going to make you not want to offend
But
again.
it'll keep you off the street.
No, but then the argument is to just put somebody in prison forever. Believe me, I'm not completely lefty soft.
No, I know you're not. But the policeman who's worked so hard to nail a prisoner and get him
has been let down by the previous government.
Get him through the courts.
Not surprisingly, the calls are coming in thick and fast on this
get him
one.
through the courts.
Let's go directly to Charlotte.
Charlotte.
Charlotte's ringing from County Durham. Morning, Charlotte. What do you think about the idea of letting prisoners out after just 40% of their sentence has been served?
I think it's a very bad idea, and I think that although this can't be done overnight, the government has got to start building more prisons. I think that's number one answer, but also, as one of your guests said, a lot of the people in the prisons are foreign nationals, so they should be deported. I think that if you start releasing people after less than half of their sentence, it puts the public safety at risk. And people are at risk from non-violent criminals as well, such as fraudsters. And
shoplifters. I mean, these absolute kind of attacks of
Gangs.
shoplifting.
Gangs.
And you know, I interviewed the chairman of the co-op, and he said, you know, these are gangs with weapons and missiles and God knows what. Obviously, you know, shop staff, retail staff are terrified, and quite rightly so. And they call the police and nobody comes. Yeah. So, Charlotte, do you feel as if there's a kind of almost a recipe for lawlessness and that this underlines it? It says, yeah, you know, do come in and shoplift something if its value's under £200. And yeah, sure, you know, do something against the law, because the absolute worst of it will be 40% of a reasonable sentence.
Yes, actually, I've seen signs in the supermarkets now. You know, the old signs, shoplifters will be prosecuted. It says shoplifters may be prosecuted. I think you have to have deterrent, because if you don't have deterrent, then people think they can just do whatever they like. And a lot of people out there are criminally minded, and there has to be a deterrent to stop would-be criminals.
Tell me something. Do you feel safe in your own neighbourhood?
Oh yes, my neighbourhood is very nice and safe. Yes, I know a lot of neighbourhoods aren't. I feel sorry for people that live in those, but where I live, it's safe.
This morning, Charlotte. Thank you so much for ringing. Let's talk to Dawn in Northampton. Good morning, Dawn.
Good morning.
I mean, they're down, they say, to their last 250 prison places. So, what is the new Prime Minister supposed to do?
I just think to let people out, because it's costing the government too much money to have so much people in prison, and they could be working and contributing to society.
So the idea that it's very hard indeed for people who've been in prison to find employment when they get out, and that's what Mr Timpson, the new prisons minister, is all about, because he has employed, hasn't he, hundreds, even thousands of former convicts in his, you know, key pressing shops all over the country. But you think get people out of prison and get them to work?
Yes, definitely. I saw something on the TV on the weekend where somebody became a chef, and he learnt that all in prison. He went to one of the famous cooks restaurants and learned, and you know, he made a book and stuff. So I think it's good if we help them to come out and do something better in society.
All right, so rehabilitation instead of
I don't think all prisoners
let me bring in
want it.
Chris, because Chris is on the line in Manchester, desperate to know what Chris has to say. Hi, Chris.
Morning, folks. I think, Keir Starmer's a lawyer. Mike, you'll love this. I've just switched over and seen Tony Blair give his vision of Britain. Oh dear, are we in trouble? But anyway.
Oh, I don't know, I didn't see it.
It was on GB News, which I'm probably not allowed to mention. Anyway.
Too late.
Too late. I believe that the deterrents aren't there at all. And the thing is, the lawyers now, how do you define a violent crime? Physical violence is one thing. Mental and what I call spiritual violence is something else. And how do you define it? And the lawyers will be kicking this round to death. And to me, and Mike's quite right, we need to deport people who shouldn't be. Well, certainly are foreign nationals. And yeah, if we have to build more prisons, so be it. The deterrent, I said to your researcher, if you're convicted for 6 years, you serve 3, and then this 40% they're talking about means you'll serve 1.2 years. For what could be a very serious crime. It's nonsense. And the criminals will just think this is a free hit.
All right, Chris, thank you very much indeed. After the break, and we can speak to Andy in Worcester on this. Andy, you work as a prison officer, and I'm so pleased you phoned, because you can give us some idea of what the current crowding is like, and you know whether there's no choice but to let prisoners out early. Morning.
Morning, Vanessa. I think we've got a choice of what we do. It's how we do it. I've been doing the job nearly 20 years. I've seen the same people in and out all the time, constantly being recalled back from the probation service, who, if that was your business and you lost money for every person that came back into prison, I think you'd be out of money and out of work very, very quickly. I know there's a lot of talk about this new national service thing that they were talking about when the Tories were in power. But if you're going to release people early, I think you've got to find them somewhere to work. You've got to get them off the streets, and then if they do return, they come back for the completion of all of their sentence.
Give
And
me
if they were
some
to go
picture,
to-
Andy, from your experience as a prison officer. The prisoners that are released, the ones who come back and back and back, the reoffenders, what normally happens when they leave? Do they just go straight back into whatever it was they were doing before? Is that the issue? Is it because people won't offer them jobs? What's going on?
I think it's down to them not being offered jobs. There's a lot of people that get released which don't want to work anyway. They aren't bothered whether they have money from working or handed out to them on a plate. But they sometimes get released. They get recalled quite quickly, whether that's down to the probation service not having enough probation officers. We can only do so much in prison, but what I do know is there's not a single man in the building that I work in that wants to be there as a prisoner. Obviously, we need to be there as staff, but none of them want to be there.
And
No
talk to
one
me,
does.
Andy, about the crowding in your prison. I mean, what sort of situation is it at the moment in terms of cells and availability?
We haven't got any overcrowding as such. We've got one head on every bed. So you might get 20 go home today and then no more than 20 can come back in. But I think if they were to be put onto some sort of... If you gave the judge the power to say you can go to prison or you can go through that door and you can do some form of national service, and I don't mean send them off to war to be cannon fodder, to learn a trade, to learn some self-worth, to give them something to aim at for themselves. And then at the end of the day, their parents might actually say, I'm pretty proud of you, son, because you've done something that I didn't think you'd ever do. That's where we've got to start. We've got to get them working. And then at the end of that, if you like, national service, you then give them the option of going for the armed forces properly, like everybody else would do.
And I don't think, Mike, I don't think the current government are interested in national service of any kind.
I don't think they are. Can I just ask, Andy, you said one head on every bed, so I understand that's single-person cells. What's the problem with doubling up prisoners 2 or 3 to a cell? Because prison's not meant to be comfortable.
Yeah, but the thing with that, Michael, is there's one head on every bed. Some people can't live in a cell with somebody else because of their risk to that other person.
Yep.
There are people there whereby, because most of the buildings, which are new prisons now, are modular buildings, there's no room for a third bed if there's 2 beds in there. There just isn't that capacity.
Right.
What you have got is you've got a lot of people that are in prison in this country, but it's not their country. They're actually the guests of us. There's around about 10,000, I reckon. So that's 10 1,000-bed prisons. Then you wouldn't have an overcrowding problem.
Yeah, that's
Andy, thank you very much indeed. Thanks for your expertise and thanks for the call. Let's talk to Graham in Glasgow. Morning, Graham.
Good morning.
Hi.
I agree with the last caller. The probation services haven't got enough men to cover the people who are out there now. So the people who get out will end up going back in because they're not going to get benefits, they're not going to get housing, and they're not going to get any support. People need to learn that we need to start rehabilitating people, educating them and counselling. It's fine saying put people in jail, but it's really expensive. We need to start keeping people in the house with the ankle bracelets and increasing the probation service. That's what I think.
Graham, I think every word you say makes perfect sense, obviously, but what do you think of the solution, which is let people out early, let them out when they've served only 40% of their sentence? Is that because there's no alternative? What do you think of that idea?
I understand that there isn't going to be any room for any more prisoners, but if you let, say, 2,000 people out tomorrow, they'll be back in jail in 3 months' time, so we'll have the same problem again. It's going to just be a constant treadmill. We need to change the way we treat criminals. I've been saying this for 30 years.
Yeah, Graham, thank you very much. I mean, Nicola, what Graham's saying makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. I've just found it really interesting this morning, the spin that this story has had. You know, there's a lot of fear-mongering out there going, Labour want to release prisoners. But the alternative, and what we should be saying is, no, would you rather no more criminals went to prison because there's no space for them? It's a really, really tricky situation, as I've said, that he inherited from the previous government. But as that previous caller was saying, I think it was Graham, you know, lack of investment in parole services as well. Great, we'll let people out of prison, but who's going to be not looking after them, you know, in that sense, but watching over them? I'm also very concerned with this scheme, if it was an automatic release, say at 40% of the sentence, what about victims of stalking, victims of domestic violence? Is the infrastructure in place to make sure that those people who were victims of these criminals who were being released are being informed?
Well, they're particularly saying that they're not releasing violent criminals and they're not
Yeah, but
releasing
how do you
prisoners who
classify
are
a
a
violent
physical
criminal?
or violent
That's a really
threat to
good
others.
point.
Well, I think if it's domestic violence, which you just mentioned,
but
that's a violent
that's a
criminal.
problem. In this country, we downgrade domestic violence. We will say a chap's been attacking a woman or a woman's been attacking a man inside a home. They're not regarded as violent criminals for some unknown reason.
Well, what's being understood is that those people would not be,
if it was
released. And people
crime.
presenting an obvious physical threat would not be released. That's what the kind of understanding is. Let's talk to Stuart in Somerset. Hello, Stuart. Hi.
Good morning, all. Good morning.
Morning. What's your take on this, Stuart?
So you're discussing a very complex and very complicated issue. When I joined the prison service in 1991 under a Tory government, the prison population in England and Wales was 48,000 prisoners scattered across 143 prisons.
Yeah.
When nowadays we're at 90,000 prisoners in England and Wales, scattered across about 130 state-run prisons and 11 or 15 privately financed initiatives. But the prisons are 1/3 of the criminal justice system. All three parts operate separately. It is the police's role to investigate crime and to prosecute the perpetrators of crime. It is the criminal justice system, the courts, to deliberate, to determine and sentence those perpetrators of crime. It is the prison's then role to look after prisoners with humanity and respect and help them lead law-abiding lives in custody and after release.
True. Stuart, therefore, if there are only 250 places left, which is the current situation, what to do about it, rather than theorising about what everyone ought to be doing, what to do about this immediate problem. It's a huge problem, isn't it?
Well, let's just go back a stage and I'll finish my sentence. It is not a Labour problem. It is not a Conservative problem. It is a societal-based problem. Do you want to spend money keeping perpetrators of crime off the streets? It costs money. Do you want to have some form of managing the recidivism rates, the return prisoners? It costs money.
All right, Stuart, I'm going to move to another caller, but just to fit the caller in. Rini in London, hello, very quickly from you. What do you think about this? A good idea or not?
No, I think it's terrible. I mean, yesterday, I lived quite near Cockfosters, and yesterday there was a machete attack between two gangs, which is a beautiful area around there.
I know it
well.
well.
I just think it's just disgusting that they want to let them out early.
Rini, thank you very much indeed. I mean, that's real life in a beautiful,
Sum it up, doesn't it? Yeah.
suburb just outside London. Thank you so much for all your calls on this. Later on, we'll be